Good morning, Professor. How are you today?
I'm
Thank you
very
so much.
well.
Thank you so
Great
much for
to meet
agreeing
you.
to. Nice to meet you. Thanks so much for agreeing to give a little talk about an image for a symposium. Um, yeah. So whenever you're ready, I'd love to hear about this Homer painting.
So yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be able to make a contribution to the symposium, which I'm really very excited about. So here we're looking at a watercolor painted in 1904 by American artist Winslow Homer, who was, as many people may know, an avid fly fisherman, as well as an extremely accomplished watercolorist. And in many of his later years and watercoloring expeditions, he would often paint images for fellow fly fishing enthusiasts. So this is sort of one of a group of images that he made about fly fishing. And what initially attracted me to this image and to Winslow Homer's fly fishing watercolors in general is the way that he kind of blends a watery, liquid, fluid, malleable medium with the substance of water. But so that, plenty of people have done work on Winslow Homer's watercolors and depicting water, and a lot of people have done interesting scholarship on his fly fishing images. In particular, there's an exhibition catalog that specifically addresses him as a sportsman and as a lover of fly fishing. My interest in fly fishing comes from a slightly different angle, however, and that has to do with my ongoing work on interspecies aesthetics. So in other projects, I've written about feathered millinery or bird hats as an example of the way that an animal species, namely birds, demonstrates a particular kind of affinity for display and for fashionability and for showiness that coordinated with human love of aesthetic response, display, and showiness. And so thinking about the parallels or the connections between human and other than human aesthetic responses is really interesting to me. So working on bird hats and on feathers led me to be interested in feathers in general. And then I started thinking about fly fishing and the particular kinds of kinship that emerge in fly fishing, in which you've got one species, namely humans, using the products of another species, namely birds, to imitate the appearance of a third species, namely flies, to fool a fourth species, fish, into behaving in a manner that causes them to leave their aquatic home and leap skyward in pursuit of their quarry. So we've got this great picture of this life-size black bass leaping at a fly, which is that red object that is traced to the water. And as he does so, he angles his body up, drawing our attention to a bird flying in the sky. And I just love the way that this image brings together this four-way interspecies dialogue.
That's so funny. I hadn't thought about all four species involved in the image.
Right? I
Yeah.
think a lot of people haven't, and a lot of people get trapped, and justifiably so, because they're trapped on the surface in the marvelous use of the watercolor medium, which is so incredible here that Winslow Homer is able to give us a sense of the fishy energy and the flickering scales
Mhm.
and the bright red of the gills as the fish expands its mouth and opens its lungs to propel itself into this gesture. But when you get sort of beyond what's superficially on the surface and the sporting activity that it depicts, there are really interesting stories to tease out about how fly fishing came about, why it was a very popular sport, particularly in late 19th century and early 20th century America, why an artist would be involved in it, and moreover, why an artist would particularly give us this fish's eye view of the world, and really sort of think about the world not from the vantage point of the fisherman, but from the vantage point of these other species, including the vantage point of a fly, which is kind of what all fly fisher people do, is they think about the habits and behaviors of fish, but the habits and behaviors of flies. So I get in this project, I delve into all kinds of aspects of the visual and material culture, the fly fishing guidebooks that provided instructions in basic entomology, and the fly fishing guidebooks that gave lessons in the optics that would have actually enabled a fisherman to think about seeing the world from a fish's eye view, which is kind of fascinating. But then above all, it's really about the feathers. It's about these marvelously fabricated, intricately crafted, tiny sculptures of various species of mayflies and other sort of long-winged insects that are just masterpieces of artisanal fabrication. And in fact, making flies, even for people who were not necessarily out fishing themselves, making flies was a massive pastime. And then in more recent years, that obsession with duplicating 19th century flies led to a very famous theft from a natural history museum that took place in, I think it was 2014, in which a world-class professional musician who was also a fly tying enthusiast broke in the dead of night to this poorly guarded natural history museum and stole some of the rarest specimens of bird skins that had ever been collected for the purposes of taking these bird skins apart, taking their feathers and turning them into flies, and or more pointedly selling them on eBay on the black market. And there's a huge black market in bird skins for the purposes of the fly tying community. I mean, once you start digging a little bit deeper behind the surface of an image like this, the stories that emerge are just mind-blowing and so fun. So yeah, I haven't, it was really hard not to think about and write about and talk about the whole feather heist, as it's called. But it's part of the whole backstory.
That's absolutely wild. I mean, I guess that means that certain feathers are better for making flies, and I guess that these
Certain kinds of
feathers were.
species of bird, like the scarlet ibis, which is
Mm,
a red-feathered tropical bird, are prized for the particular vermilion hue of
mm,
their feathers, which then go into making a very specific kind of artificial fly.
mm,
And it looks, we can see from the painting here, it is, it's bright red, it sparkles, it's got these hidden barbs, there's kind of an elaborate recipe for how to make these very specific kinds of flies. Interesting side point, one of the people who really helped to promote fly tying as an art as well as a feature of the sport was a woman named Mabel Orvis Marbury, who was part of the Orvis family of sportsmen in Vermont, who helped to popularize the sport. And she and her team of women were all master fly tyers and accomplished in the art of tying flies. So there's this other sort of interesting gender dynamics to fly fishing and fly tying. That's a whole other story that can be teased out of this nexus of forces and events that kind of come out of this image.
Do you know anything about the fly in this image in particular?
I really don't. I know that, again, it was trying to emulate a species of mayfly. The thing is, very few mayflies have that kind of bright red, I don't want to call it plumage because it's not really plumage. Very few kinds of species of flies would have that coloration. Um, but the flies were not only imitating particular kinds of known species, they were imitating the kinds of behaviors of mayflies and moths. So they might have departed from the strict naturalism of trying to duplicate the appearance of a fly in order to perpetuate a bigger goal or a bigger event of fooling a fish. And that is, there's all these elaborate stories in a lot of the literature about the steps one would take to have to really tease and interest a very wily trout or bass. So the ways in which sports people were instructed to behave, it was all about this elaborate game of deception. And in fact, many devoted fly fishermen who write about their sport often praise the acumen of the fish for being able to resist the appeal or the allure of the dazzling hoax. So there's another way in which this painting and this story delves into kind of the history of P.T. Barnum and hoaxes and popular deceptions that were really popular in the 19th century as well.
That's so funny. That's so interesting. What do you make of the bird in the top of the image?
That's my favorite part.
Yeah.
It's my absolute favorite part, because to my mind, there's this trajectory of there's this trajectory of longing, as I guess I'm going to call it. It's the fish that's leaping after the lure of the fly, but in that enormous liquid eye that we can see at the top of his head, we can almost, if we're thinking sort of, very anthropomorphically, I want to project a sense of my own longing, my own desire to think and be like a fish, to think and be like a bird. So we have this fish throwing itself out of the water and leaping into the air. And then we have this bird soaring through the air. And these two species are sort of in and out of their mediums. They're aspiring to do what they do best. And I see that in the dynamic of the way that the painting is laid out, inviting us even also to think about what it must feel like to be a fish leaping into the air, or to be a bird soaring through the air towards a tree. It's just marvelous for that reason.
It's such a funny detail, and especially because the fish is rendered so specifically and the bird is just this like wash of black.
But it's enough to suggest that it's a large bird.
Yeah.
It's possibly an exotic bird. This was painted in, I believe it was painted in Florida. Winslow Homer went all over mostly the East Coast, but to the Adirondacks, to Canada, and as far south as Florida to pursue his interest in fly fishing and the kinds of species that he knew inhabited these warm waters versus the kind of species that inhabited cooler waters, where he was really attentive to the nuances of their appearance, which makes his illustrations stand out for their attention to species detail. So this wouldn't necessarily pass muster as a scientific diagram of the black bass. And yet you have him painting these multiple fins and the gills. You have him painting the coloration of the fish in a way that really engages the idea of the fish's vitality. And then that coordinates with the bird's vitality, and even the vitality and the agency of the insect, which here present only in a fabrication, is still nonetheless conjured through this line. And I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's a very faint white line that traces across the surface, that's sort of scratched into the surface of the watercolor. And that's the line of the what's the word I'm looking for? The catgut that would have been tied to the end of the fly fishing rod that an accomplished fly fisher person would then be able to wield and flicker through the air in such a way that it caused it to dance and float through the air and entice a fish to leap out of the water to get at this this teasing little facsimile of a insect.
I didn't realize that. Isn't catgut like used in surgery?
It is, and there were various kinds of silks. There were various kinds of other kinds of substances that were used in fly fishing. Some of them coarser and some of them finer. This is actually probably silk, not catgut, but the word escaped me at the moment.
You're fine. I only recently learned that word, and yeah. Anyway, I thought when I read it for the first time, I thought somebody had made it up and they were just had decided that this person was using cat guts. But yes, I feel like silk is more.
Yeah, but then
It's
again,
definitely more likely.
You get two other kinds of animal products there,
Yeah.
animal intestines or silk.
Right.
And then that too becomes really, really fascinating part of this bigger story about the networks of dependencies, the networks of relationships that can be teased out of this image.
Yeah, it's like a whole ecosystem of imitations and uses of different animals.
Yeah, and also there's a tremendous amount of pleasure in it.
Mm.
There's the sense of pleasure of the bird. There's the sense of desire and pleasure on the part of the fish, and of course the pleasure of being a fly fisherman, being out on the water and being immersed in this kind of environment, to know it so well that then of course there's just simply the visual pleasure of looking at this gorgeous image that calls to mind so many associations.
I love that you mentioned the pleasure of the fish, because I've been thinking this whole time about how he's really going for it. Like
Yeah.
he's just so, like, his mouth is so open. You can tell, you can see like all of the muscles in his face that are like really excited to get that fake bug. Yeah, he's just really, and I mean, he's so far out of the
All
water.
in. All
Yeah,
in.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's really going for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so funny. And then so is the line, because the line would have just been on the water. And so it's almost like he's in the process of pulling it. It's just at that moment where the fish
Yeah.
is biting, and also he's realized that he's got it.
Everything coalesces. Everything coalesces in this wonderful moment that is forever arrested in time,
Mhm.
but has such an almost cinematic sense of this happened, this is about to happen. And yeah, the bird swooping to land on that palmetto tree in the background, the fish about to have, well, let's call it a rough time.
Yeah.
Although I would say that Winslow Homer was often more interested in catching than keeping
Mm.
the animals that he went in pursuit of. There was this incredible respect for the caginess of the fish, and for the ability of the fish to do this with their bodies. It's just amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely can't throw myself halfway into the water.
Nope.
Well, thank you so much. Is there any last meditations that you'd like to offer?
I just think this is an example of the kind of opportunity
Mm.
that an expanded visual culture offers us, especially a visual culture that's attuned to these interspecies kinships, these what Donna Haraway and others might call these creaturely co-constituents, who with whom and with humans the world is created, a world of possibility. So I think of the fish here as being a profound agent, a creator of what the kind of work that Winslow Homer was doing was made possible by the fish, and of course by these other interspecies kinships that emerge.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so cool. This is such a cool image. And it was lovely speaking with you.
Great to speak to you too. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you so much.